And
Good
we're live.
afternoon. My name is Judge Karima Hill Harvey, co-chair of the Sarasota County Bar Council for Diversity and Inclusion. I would like to thank you, our viewers, and the panel for attending and participating in this town hall, a conversation about racism and inequality. The recent death of George Floyd and the protests have triggered the Sarasota County Bar Association and its Council of Diversity and Inclusion to stand in solidarity with demonstrators across the nation as we speak out against systemic racism that is pervasive in our society. We are committed to promoting and encouraging meaningful law enforcement, criminal justice reform, and better understanding of the issues. Today's conversation is the first step in our mission. This will not be our last conversation. We have town hall conversations scheduled for July 30th and August 21st. Finally, before I introduce our moderator, I want to remind you that the Sarasota County Bar Association's Council for Diversity and Inclusion remains committed to providing scholarships to deserving minority law students and to graduates of the Booker High School Academy. We were honored to receive a $50,000 challenge grant from the William Muirhead Charitable Fund at the Community Foundation. Please consider making a donation. Any amount will help us. Also, we would like to thank the Sarasota County Bar for donating Panera gift certificates for the first 100 registrants in the town hall. And with that, I will turn over the program over to Carrie Scheidman, our moderator.
Hi, I'm Carrie Seidman. I'm the lead columnist for the Sarasota Herald Tribune, and I'm very privileged and slightly intimidated to moderate this panel today. We have 4 very esteemed community members to share with us their thoughts today. And as you know, we all only have an hour, so clearly this is a topic that is far broader than can be encompassed in an hour, but we're eager to hear their input on what we can get to today. And I'd just like to introduce them briefly to start. They all have biographies that are pages long. And in the interest of hearing their thoughts rather than their histories, I'm very much abbreviating their biographies. But so to my left, at the top left of my screen anyway, is Dr. Queen Zabriskie. She is an associate professor of sociology, theater, dance, and performance art at New College of Florida. She's also a trainer for the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, which is an anti-racist education organization, and she's very active locally in the anti-racism working group. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next we have Trevor Harvey, who is a Sarasota native, graduate of Sarasota High. He, since 2006, has been the president of the Sarasota County chapter of NAACP. And he is also an academic student success advisor at State College of Florida. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you for having me.
Next, we have Senator Keith DuBose. He is a partner in the law firm. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong person. We have Keith DuBose, who is a partner in the law firm Matthews and Eastmore. He has a civil litigation and trial practice, and he's a very active volunteer in the community, in particularly focusing on efforts to help youth in the community. And now we have Senator Darrell Rousseau. He has been a state senator for District 19 since 2016, which covers part of Pinellas and part of Hillsborough County. He was also the first African-American prosecutor in Pinellas County, and he also practices law with Rubenstein Law in Tampa. So forgive me, panelists, if I botched anyone's name. I hope I didn't. We're going to start off by asking each of you to respond to the first question. We'll start with Dr. Zabriskie. And the question is, take yourself back to the moment that you first saw the video of George Floyd's death, and your personal response to it and your thoughts in the period after viewing it. Dr. Zabriskie?
Sure, thank you. When I first saw the video, I was sitting at my dining room table, watching it on my computer, and it made me sick to my stomach, and it made me angry. And it made me feel those things because I saw Officer Chauvin in broad daylight, calmly, right? Hands looked like they were in his pocket or close to his pocket, with his knee, right, on the neck of George Floyd. And, you know, he was just calmly sitting there while, you know, George Floyd was begging, right, and saying, I can't breathe, and begging for him to stop. And I saw subsequent photographs of the other officers on the other side, and it were, you know, at one point there was 3 officers on the body of this one Black man who was already, you know, on the ground, and I had a huge emotional reaction, right? Because it was clearly an excessive use of force. And, you know, I remember thinking like, man, I hope they don't get away with this, like so many of the other cases of excessive use of force and of unjustified deadly use of force that have been caught on camera, right? I said, thank goodness this is on camera, and I hope they don't get away with it like so many of the other cases. So those were my initial reactions when I saw the video.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Harvey?
As a African American man, I had so many raw emotions when I saw the George Floyd situation, because I ended up putting myself in the shoes of George Floyd as an African American male. I have 2 grown sons, one 26 and 32. I put them in the shoes of George Floyd. And then I have 3 grandchildren, and 2 of them are boys. I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old grandson. And I put them in the shoes of George Floyd as well, and saying this could have been any one of us at any time in this situation that Mr. George Floyd is in. So those are the raw emotions. I begin to break down as a father, as a grandfather, as a community activist. I begin to break down and start asking myself the question, why do we continually, year after year or month after month or week after week, why do we continue to have these kinds of senseless incidents in our communities by the ones who are supposed to protect and serve us? But not only with just George Floyd, and I want people to hear me clearly, because the George Floyd situation was clear cut. And I mean, I was sick to my stomach. But I even go to Rayshard Brooks, and I think my emotions was even a little higher with the Rayshard Brooks situation, because the officer had the opportunity to let Mr. Brooks just go. Mr. Brooks wasn't in a threatening manner. The taser that Mr. Brooks had already been discharged twice. So it wasn't a threat to anyone. It wasn't going to dislodge anymore. And he was running away. And I was literally more pained by that than I was with the George Floyd situation, because here it is, you had an individual that had the opportunity to be let go. Let him go home. He was running towards his sister's house across the street. Let him sleep it off. Go get him the next day. You had his license, you had his car. Go get him the next day and deal with the particular issue that you were dealing with at the Wendy's parking lot. So those are just raw emotions for me, as a Black man, that we continue to, have these things occur in our communities. And I'm just hoping that one day that my 9-year-old grandson and my 5-year-old grandson and even my 3-year-old granddaughter does not have to deal with these type of issues that we continue to see in our community.
Thank you. Mr. DuBose? You need to unmute yourself.
If you're asking about my immediate reactions about what happened to Mr. Floyd and we're leaving him there, my first reactions were those of disbelief. I just was unable to process that this was actually taking place. Then my emotions turned to those of concern for Mr. Floyd, those of pain and hurt for him, for what he was going through, and for concern for his family. Shortly thereafter, my emotions turned to anger. I was angry that Mr. Floyd is having to go through such a horrifying event. I was pissed off that the officers thought that they had the right to do what they were doing to Mr. Floyd and inflict the type of harm that they were doing. And the fact that they saw no problem with what they were doing. They knew they were on video. It was being witnessed, as what happens in many instances. These incidents are uncovered, or not uncovered, but they're behind the scenes. But this was in broad daylight. This was in front of everyone to see. This was in front of witnesses. And the audacity of the officers to believe that they had the power, they had the authority, and they had the ability to arrest this gentleman and convict him on the spot. Those were the things that pissed me off, that took me past the point of anger. My emotions went from there to those of concern for my son, not necessarily for myself, but mostly for my son, who is 17 years old, soon to be 18. And he does not go to work in a suit and tie. He does not go to work every day like I do. He would be dressed just as Mr. Floyd. So my concern was for my son. And then my emotions went back to being angry and upset as the 8 minutes and 46 seconds transpired until Mr. Floyd passed away. And so those are my immediate concerns. I do have some additional thoughts I'm sure we'll get a chance to share later on, but those are my immediate emotions.
Thank you. I don't know if the audience that's watching is going through the same emotions that I am, but I'm taken back to the first moment that I saw the video as well. And it is still a visceral feeling of shock and pain. And I'm sure that, you know, all of you watching can relate. Senator Rousseau, can you share your thoughts, please?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for pulling this town hall together and having such an esteemed group of leaders involved. I share wholeheartedly, and I meant wholeheartedly, the sentiment and the expressions of each of my colleagues that have spoken before me. And for me, it was personal. What I looked at was the arrogance on the face of this man with his hand in his pocket and his knee on the neck of a human being who had already been handcuffed with 2-3 officers assisting, and there was no reason to spend 8 minutes and 46 seconds on his neck. Then the outrage ran the gamut. And I began to think about my 5 boys, 26, 25, 19, 17, and 14. And particularly the conversations we have had to have with them at the dinner table. It used to be a time in America when the best chance a Black man had to survive a cop stop was to run. Now the best chance you have to survive a cop stop is to comply, but then it's only 50% of the time. Oh my gosh. And then what really brought this home to me as of late was the gut punch of the third stripe, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, then of course George Floyd. But lately, Elijah McClain brings concern to me about how many others have yet been uncovered. Black men killed, unarmed at the hands of a police officer. And our 5th son was born on the autism spectrum, like Elijah McClain, and processes things a little bit slower than the rest of us. And again, we had to have this discussion with him about what happens if you get stopped by a police officer that does not recognize your mental challenge, your autism, and whether or not you'll survive that stop. That was outrage. But this is a great portal of opportunity that has opened up, and out of tragedy must come triumph. We must walk through this opportunity now in the middle of chaos and show up, and each one of us do our part, each one of us. The whole historical context of Black men unarmed being stopped by police officers, and that officer being the judge, jury, and executioner, all of them came to mind when I saw that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all for sharing those very personal thoughts about how it struck you. I'd like to pose the next question, and I'd like everyone to respond, but whoever wants to speak first, maybe just lift your hand so I can recognize you. Obviously, these cases of excessive and often deadly force by police against usually Black men, have happened so much that I would like to ask you to think about, in your opinion, what are the root causes? Why does this keep happening? Time after time, we see this happen and we think we have to change this, but it keeps happening. So if you could just share your thoughts about what is fueling this and perpetuating this. Is there someone who'd like to go first?
Go ahead, Queen.
Dr. Zabriskie?
So for me, you have a system, right, that was designed around the idea of controlling, right, those groups who've been labeled dangerous and a threat. You know, so during enslavement in the South, we know that the police evolved out of the slave patrols. And in the North, we know that they evolve out of policing immigrant communities. We know that poor whites have been policed too, but they, you know, over time have eventually, they were able to join the slave patrols and join the police forces, right? So that we know that there's a system that is put in place that is about, again, policing those people or controlling those people who've been labeled as dangerous. We know that there are a whole set of laws, right? Like slave codes during enslavement, Negro codes during enslavement, post-emancipation. We know that there are things like black codes. We know that there are things like vagrancy laws, right? We know that there's a whole sort of legal system, right? That that police, right, and those who are acting in that mode are enforcing, right, and as well as enabled by, right? And here, in my thoughts on this part, I'm thinking about the work of Khalil Gibran Muhammad. He has a great book called The Condemnation of Blackness, right? And he says, policing as a system has been a system of control and sorting people that decides who gets to live and who gets to die, even with even the mere accusations of criminality. And so for Black folks and Black men in particular, we know that there's a long history of criminalizing Blackness and criminalizing Black men, right? And we know that this has happened in popular culture, right? So I think of the 1915 film, Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith, which was a commercial success at its time, which is talked about as responsible for the rebirth of the KKK, which, you know, the cross burning practice of the KKK comes from that film, right? They see it in that film and then the KKK takes that on. We know that, you know, in the media and the press, we have these sort of narratives that aid in the construction of ideas about Black criminality or Blackness and Black men in particular as being dangerous. So here I'm thinking about Ida B. Wells Barnett and her anti-lynching campaign. And one of the things that she did is she went and attacked the narrative and disproved the narrative that was being perpetuated in the media about Black men being lynched because of raping white women, right? She exposed that as a lie, right? I'm also thinking in a more contemporary moment, Michelle Alexander writes in her book, The New Jim Crow, she talks about the idea of the criminal Black man and how that's being used to support and justify unequal treatment of Black folks and Black men in particular within the criminal justice system. And so, and even more recently, right, in one of our local newspapers, right, there was an article about a shooting in the downtown area of Minneapolis, nowhere near any of the Black Lives Matter protesters, but there was an image of Black Lives Matter protesters next to this article about shooting, and it was an image of Black men protesting, and it had nothing to do with the shooting, right? So we know that in the media, there's this long history of supporting the construction of this narrative in popular culture, in the media, and in our other institutions. So, so for me, in terms of thinking of other institutions, the audience may be interested in a book called Punished by sociologist Victor Rios. And the subtitle of that is Policing the Lives of Black and Latino Boys. And again, he talks about criminalization, right? And how the construction of Blackness and Black boys and Latino boys as dangerous gets used to justify excessive force, to justify control, right, of their bodies and of their movements. So for me, the system was designed in that way, right? If we look at the history of the system, it was designed in that way, right? And we have also a history and contemporary practice of criminalizing Blackness and criminalizing Black men and Black women that helps to sustain that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would boil it down, and I appreciate the thoughts of my colleague. She wrote quite a dissertation in those last 5 minutes about the history of a culture in the police departments across this nation and implicit bias that each one of us brings to our professional jobs, and law enforcement is no different. Look, I appreciate good law enforcement. When I call an officer because of a threat or damages or danger, I want them to have every tool in the toolbox to be able to stop the threat. When I was president of the NAACP, and I respect President Harvey so much for the role that he plays in community, there was tension that came boiling over in the Black community of St. Petersburg and the St. Pete Police Department. So much so that a radical group sprayed my NAACP headquarters, "No more Popo. Popo, keep out. This is our territory." And they were going around talking about police containment instead of police enforcement. And I said, you know what? If you think the police department is our total problem, then join the police department. Change the culture from inside out. We couldn't get one applicant to join the police department because of the mistrust, the tension. And I think that boils over into how the treatment is handled of Black men.
I'll jump in here, and Queen, as an educator, really laid the historical perspective of policing in our country out very, very well. And I too believe that a lot of it is just really based on power. You know, the police departments were established, you know, by the good old boy system, you know, back from the foundation of this country. And as a result of that, that has trickled down all the way through the 21st century of policing as well. The good old boy system mentality has not gotten all the way out of many of our departments here locally in the state, as well as around the country. And I think one of the ways, as the question asks, what are some of the ways that our local law enforcement officers could deal with the issues that are hand, and Representative Rousson was beginning to talk about it, is from a cultural perspective, because we really, at the end of the day, can put all of the reform in place. We can put all of the various trainings in place. But if the cultural mindset of our local law enforcement agencies locally and around this country does not change, we actually will still continue to see some of the issues that we see within our communities. So it really boils down to their heart. Their heart has to change. The culture has to change, and then the law enforcement heads have to begin to stand up and say, we are not going to let one person, two person, three bad rogue officers within our departments ruin the good work that we really do for our everyday citizens. Until that occurs, until the union stops allowing these officers to hide behind them, until the Florida Police Bill of Rights puts some of the power back into the hands of the local law enforcement agencies. You know, they have to go, you know, if you understand the Florida Bill of Rights, and I know Keith, who as an attorney, and Darrell Roussan as an attorney understands it much more than I do, but they have more rights than the average everyday citizen with the Florida Police Bill of Rights. And until some of these things begin to change, unfortunately, we will continue to have some of the issues that we have. So that's really what I think it really boils down to at the end of the day. The culture, the mindset, the heart has to change, and we have to begin to stop holding these unions accountable for letting these officers hide behind them.
Thank you. Mr. DuBose, did you want to chime in here?
Sure. Yes, I did. Thank you. I appreciate the comments of my colleagues. And I think I'm just going to take a little bit different approach. To me, this is the reason this is happening is systemic. It's something that has taken place since African Americans were brought from the coast of Africa to the United States. And it was emphasized further by the founding fathers of our country. It was also emphasized by lawmakers as they determined that they were going to continue to treat Black people as property. And they were going to count every 3 out of every 5 Black people when it came to representation in this union. And to me, it boils down to very simply being seen as a human being. There are many people in this world who today do not consider Black people as equal, as human beings. And when we take it back to George Floyd, this is something that a human being, not necessarily, not even a Black person, but a human being should not be subjected to. And when you think about what happened to George Floyd, that's something that you would think, okay, if that happened to an animal, even animals, people would have been more outraged about that. But we are talking about a human being. And in the eyes of many Americans, that still is not how African Americans or Black people are seen. We're not given that. When Senator Roussan talks about the conversation that he has to have with his son, the average human being, white man, does not have to have that conversation with his son when he leaves the house. I have a partner in my office who has sons. He does not have to have those conversations with his son when he leaves, when his sons leave their house. But that is a conversation that I have and that my son's mom has every time our son leaves the house. It's something that I'm constantly reminded of when I'm out. But as human beings, we should not have to have that conversation. And how does it stop? It plainly stops when we look through the eyes of God and treat everyone, despite skin color, as human beings. We have to have conversations like this. I've challenged my partners in my office to have conversations with their friends at the country clubs, at the stores, at wherever they are, that those individuals don't associate with Black people, to say, you know what? I have a partner who has to have a conversation with his son every time he leaves the house. That's not fair. So what can you do to help white America? You can have those uncomfortable conversations because, you know, I'm tired of being uncomfortable. I'm tired of having to be in a situation where I have to portray being a Black male, but I also have to fit into a white culture. I'm tired of being uncomfortable. I think at this point, it's time for everyone to be uncomfortable so that we can have the conversations that we need to have, and that we have the conversations that people understand that people with this type of skin color are human beings, just like people with lesser melanin in their system.
Thank you so much. Excellent comments
No,
from
Carrie,
everyone.
if you don't mind,
Yeah, go
I
ahead,
just wanted to table off of what Keith is saying. And when we talk about as Black men, the conversations that we have to have, as conversations that we have to have with our African American sons, my boys carry this in their car. This is a curriculum that the NAACP designed back some years ago, and Darrell, you may remember this. but my boys put this in the visor of their cars. They don't go anywhere without this. And this pamphlet basically tells them what are the do's and the don'ts when they're stopped by law enforcement, how they're to engage with law enforcement. And as Keith stated, our white friends and our white colleagues don't have to give this to their sons. You know, they don't have to have these conversations with their sons. And as he stated, until we as a group of people begin to say enough is enough, and we're not going to tolerate these kind of things, and our white colleagues are going to start having the same open conversations that they would have with us with a cup of coffee, but they're going to go to the country club or the golf course, or when they're in their marketing meetings, you know, deciding billions of dollars are going to be spent, they're going to talk about these things. I'm often reminded of what Benjamin Franklin says: justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are just as outraged as those who are.
That's powerful. And building off of that, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons why these cell phone, why the cell phone footage is so important, right? Not, it's exposing stuff that Black communities have known for years have been happening. We've been fighting against for years. You can look back generations and see it. But the reality of one of the impacts of the legacy of residential segregation, right, and segregation in the US is that you have, you know, as people have said before, two Americas, right? You have, you know, communities whose realities and everyday existence are very different, right? And so to even begin to have that conversation, one of the things that these videos are doing is showing folks, like, you know, those stories, those struggles, those things that Black folks have been saying about how they are dehumanized. I love that we're using it. Dehumanized by racism, right? And by this system. You can't deny those. You can't deny it. People will try. People still try, right? That's the issue. That's the issue with the image in the local newspaper. You know, putting the Black Lives Matter protesters next to, you know, that shooting in Minneapolis, right? That's an attempt to deny and to undermine, right, the ways in which people are saying enough is enough, right? So people will still try to deny it, but absolutely, it's causing folks to understand the reality, right, that Black communities and Black folks have been trying to navigate for so long, right, and that people have been dismissing. Just one more quote from Khalil Gibran Muhammad, because I love his work, right? He says, these cases of abuse are just the tip of the iceberg of everyday forms of abuse and trauma that Black folks and others have been subjected to. Right? So that there's this reality of a double standard of justice that has been constructed over time, that has been a part of the process of creating race in this country, right? So there's a system of racism that absolutely shapes even how we perceive and understand reality. And there's an amazing opportunity that's happening, and an amazing way in which, you know, as everybody's saying, people are being called to account and called to understand that you know, Black communities are navigating a completely different America, right, than other communities.
I just want to key off what Dr. Zabriskie just said, because I'd like to ask if in your lifetimes and in your historical knowledge, does this feel, this incident, the death of George Floyd certainly has caused an eruption in the country. And I'd like you to know if you feel like this is a potential turning point, if you feel this is perhaps a different period in time where we really do have an opportunity to make a significant change.
That's a great question. And let me say that I do have to get off at 12:45. But Dr. King was asked after the 1967 national riots, when Watts was burning up and Detroit was burning up, in which age would he rather be living? And he said if he turned back the curtain of time and looked at the industrial age and all that it did for mankind, the Renaissance and all it did for the artistic value of man, even a space capsule orbiting the Earth, he would say those are wonderful times, but he would not rather be living any other time but then. And he says, I know that's a strange thing to say with the chaos happening around us. But I feel the same way today. In my 65 years, my historical experience, I would not want to be living any other time but now, because the tipping point has occurred and this portal of opportunity has opened up, and we each must walk through it with greatness on our minds, clarity of purpose, protesting. And I support the protesters. I'm a protester. You can't be an NAACP and not be a protester. But we protest with purpose that's driven towards results. And I think that this is a great opportunity for change, and change is occurring. Corporate America is throwing money at this thing. We need to channel it appropriately. And the mental health of our people, you know, Black people have suffered chronic trauma. And each Ahmaud Arbery, each Breonna Taylor, each Rayshard Brooks, each Elijah McClain is an additional trauma on the mental and emotional status of being Black in America. And until we come to grips with that now, the pandemic has pulled the scab off the wounds. And we need to cover justice from multiple fronts: education, economic, housing, healthcare. And this is just opportunity as far as I'm concerned.
Anyone else want to chime in on responding to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from where I sit at, and Senator Rouson just, I think, probably summed it up for all of us. We're all saying the same thing, but we're seeing something really different in this current wave of the movement. Completely different than we haven't seen. I don't think ever. We didn't see it in the '67 riots. We didn't see it in 1992 with Rodney King. We haven't seen it with, you know, the Eric Gardners, the Trayvon Martins, the Sandra Blands, you know, the list just goes on and on. We are seeing something completely different as a result of what happened with George Floyd. And I think because of what we're seeing differently, we have the opportunity to really impact our reform policies, the way the systematic racism, structural racism. I think we really have an opportunity to change this. I know where I sit at with the NAACP. My email, my phone is blowing up with all kinds of Fortune 500 companies who are now ready to make that paradigm shift to talk about what can we do differently as an organization, not just putting our resources behind the movement, but what can we do as an organization to help impact change within this community. So I'm like Daryl, the opportunity is endless for us right now, and we have to walk in it with purpose. We have to now move from protest to voting to reform to making something happen, because at the end of the day, let's not forget the ballot box is the key, because we have to begin to start voting people into office that has a mindset for all, for equality for all, and not one particular ethnic group within our country.
I don't disagree with anything that was said. I just want to briefly say that to me, I'm hopeful because of the younger kids today, my kids and their classmates and the people that they're growing up with. I'm hopeful that this is a turning point. I think this is different than any of the other situations because it was caught on video. It's something that everyone was able to see and see again and reflect back on, as opposed to the images that we have to conjure up in our minds of the Emmett Tills or the other individuals, Black men who were killed just because of the color of their skin. We don't have to listen to, well, is that really what happened? Don't exaggerate it, or stop complaining, or stop whining. You know, I received a text message from a community member here in Sarasota when the phrase Black Lives Matter comes up. Well, don't play the race card, all lives matter. Well, right now, Black lives are what's mattered. We know white lives matter. We know that. because we know that when we walk into a department store, you know that when you walk into a department store and you're not stereotyped, you're not followed, you're not given disadvantages just because of the color of your skin. So we know white lives matter. We know that. We have a guy number 45 who makes sure that he knows and everyone else knows that white lives matter. But we don't know, and not everyone in America knows, that Black lives matter. All right. So that person that commented, and that's here in Sarasota, you know, and so it's right here. We don't have to look to Minneapolis. We don't have to look outside of anywhere except our very own community to see that there are people who are insensitive to the needs, the wants, and the basic human rights of Black people. And to me, that's what makes me somewhat pessimistic that we won't change, because that mindset is still pervasive here in our community. And until we, as younger generation, and the people that are my son's age and my nephew's age, continue to push and continue to make those people feel uncomfortable about their mindset and how they feel about the person sitting next to them, the person riding the bus to them, the basketball player that they look up to, the football player that they look up to, the rapper that they look up to, because they are embracing Black culture. They are embracing Black culture. And until they are able to push the mark and have that mindset of old white America pushed out and made to feel uncomfortable, then we won't be able to change. But I'm confident, I'm hopeful rather, that we can make that change, that we can take. Now we have college students who, you know what, if you have the Confederate flag as part of your flag or part of your university, I'm not playing. We have to recognize, as a Black culture, we control dollars in this country. And if we make it economic, it will change. Because if I don't feel confident enough that human beings right now in this country will do the right thing just because they're going to do the right thing. If it's going to affect them financially, they will find a way to do something that may be socially conscious. I strongly believe that. And I think what we're seeing right now in this country and some of the movements with corporate America is that they believe that financially it's in their best interest to do this. I'm not convinced that socially or in the heart of everyone that they're making this change that they're going to do that. And I've had this conversation with the Sarasota County Bar Association. I've had it with my friends, and until people in control, white America in control, feels it in their pocketbook, I just don't think it's going to change. I'm hopeful that economically strengthened, either not necessarily boycotts, but smarter social purchasing selections are made. Uses of financial leverage are made by African Americans. I'm hoping that will help us turn the corner and then get us to a point to where socially we'll start making the right decision about how Black people are treated in this country.
Excellent.
The problem
Oh.
that I see with what Attorney DeBose says is he lacks passion. Preach it, brother.
I know. I want to add that I'm hopeful also, and I really appreciate.
I think, excuse me 1 second, Dr. Zabriskie. I just want to thank Senator Rasson. I think he needs to hop off the call now. So thank you so much for your participation. Sorry to lose you, and hope to see you on a future panel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daryl. We'll talk later.
Dr. Zabriskie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add that I'm super hopeful also, and I'm critically hopeful, right? Because I know that there's a long history of after Black progress backlash, right? So we can think about the abolition of slavery, Reconstruction, and we can think about the Jim Crow backlash, right? There's this long history. There's a great book called White Rage that details that, right? How in these big moments, but also in everyday practices, because part of what white supremacy does as it dehumanizes and traumatizes Black folks and people of color, it dehumanizes white folks too, right? So part of the work that definitely needs to happen, and this is what I hear in what Keith was saying, like, part of the work that has to happen is that white folks, right, have to understand it dehumanizes white folks very differently, but it dehumanizes them nonetheless. I always say you can't sit and look at a lynching, right? A lynching was a community event. You can't go to a lynching and watch someone die like that and not be dehumanized, right? And part of that dehumanization comes out in what Keith shared in terms of being insensitive, right? Not understanding the ways in which Black lives matter, right? And are just as valuable as white lives. So part of the healing that needs to happen also is within white communities, and white folks need to go into their communities and into those spaces that you know, Black folks don't have access to, and do that work.
You know, Queen, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, Queen and to Keith both, is I think the reason why I'm hopeful that we're going to see the change, because I think our white counterparts, when they look at the George Floyd situation, 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I mean, that is, I mean, that is a long time to be on somebody's neck. Just think about it, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And I think when our white America looks at that, I think they're begin to now starting to say psychologically, that could actually be us. We could be in the wrong situation at the wrong time, and then that could be us. And let's face it, if that's what it takes for white America to socially get on board with what's been happening to communities of color for over 400 years since we came here in 1619, if that's what it's going to take, then that's what it's going to take for us to have the shift that we need to have in this particular country. And I believe that's why I'm hopeful, because I think and only time will tell and actions will tell, but I think the blinders are finally starting to be scaled back somewhat to say, wait a minute, that could be us as well, you know, and that's why I'm hopeful that we're going to see the change that we need to see, not only in this country, but across this world, because we see this movement has spread it across this world. It's not just in our country. This movement is all over the world. And I think it's going to wake up the entire world.
Absolutely.
And I,
you know, for that backlash. I think we need to prepare for that, right? So that's part of me saying critically hopeful and wanting to bring that up. Mm-hmm. That absolutely, this is a global, like you said, we're watching stuff in Germany, we're watching stuff, you know, on the continent of Africa. I watch folks in Senegal see and hear and react to it in France, like in the UK. Like, so this is a moment where those connections between people of African descent around the globe are activated as people understand, hey, you know, there is this mistreatment and racism, you know, of Black folks in the United States is connected to the kind of racism I experience in my country, but also white folks, right, globally, right, and white folks here, right, getting activated. But I also hope that, and this is the critical hopeful part, like I also hope that we also understand that there's this history of backlash, and that we know, right, that we need to be prepared for that also, right? So that we can continue to make sure that this opening actually fulfills the possibilities that have been presented, because there's some amazing possibilities right now. Yeah.
So when you talk about backlash, when you talk backlash, I mean, I think, you know, again, I'm a little bit hesitant to take it out of our own backyard, and to me, there needs to be sensitivities in our community, and we talk about backlash, but we also, and it's not just the backlash towards African Americans, but it's also our white counterparts who choose to take a stand and do what's right. You know, the comment that I mentioned before was what was posted, and the woman who posted this is on several community boards and foundations in Sarasota, and her comment was, how about all lives matter, not Black lives, not white lives? Get over yourself. No one's life is more important than the next. put your race card away and grow up. Now, for someone to say that, that's, when that individual who's on several foundations in this community, again, she donates money. So she's going to be able to get away with that, because when the board chairs that were approached with that comment was, let's wait, let's see how it pans out. Why is this woman still on boards and foundations in Sarasota? And the answer is because financially, she is supportive of that foundation and organization. So again, financially, white America is going to have to say, you know what? We're not going to put up with that type of comment, that type of behavior, that type of attitude, that type of insensitivity, because it doesn't mean that much money to us. Take your money and donate it someplace else. You know, but that's where we are in just our little community here in Sarasota. You know, we don't have to look to George Floyd for a knee in the neck, because we have that here. We don't have to look for police brutality, because we have that here. You know, we have the Rodney Mitchells. We have situations where there have been acts of violence inflicted upon Black males here. But again, this type of mentality and this type of attitude is what will continue to permeate our society and plague us and act as a cancer and prevent us from moving forward, because she is in a controlling position and she knows who she is. And
Well,
other
Keith,
people that serve with boards knows who they know who she is, you know. And the thing about it is, there are others with money that think the same way.
Mm-hmm. Well, Keith, it goes right back to the comment that I made a little earlier, when our local law enforcement agencies stop allowing these cops to, number one, hide behind their badges, number two, to stop hiding behind the unions. I know that our chiefs and our sheriffs don't control the unions, but they can actually stand up and say, you know what, we not, y'all need to deal with this. Y'all need to uncover these particular officers and allow us and help us to get rid of them. They can use that influence and their power, just as we're talking about with the financial institutions, those who are bringing money to the table. Hey, you're right. Those foundations should say, we're cutting ties with you. And I think the unions and our local law enforcement agencies basically should be saying the same thing. We don't care what the backlash is. We're cutting ties. We're done.
I'm going to insert myself here. Sorry, I hate to cut anyone off, but we are getting close to the end of our time that we have available. And I just wanted to take it from the big picture that we've been looking at. As several people have said, we got trouble right here in River City. I mean, we got plenty to look at right here locally. So let's just finish up. If you would like to say the first step that you would like to see happen here, whether it be something to address the law enforcement here, or more systemic something. Let's take a minute and everybody just keep your answer brief, because we only have about 5 minutes left, and tell us what your first step would be.
I'll just speak to what I hear other people saying, right? It takes all of us to change this, right, and transform this. And to speak to this piece about the unions, right? I think the police unions are super important, and we even can think about the collective bargaining agreement, right? When those collective bargaining agreements are being negotiated, right? We need to hold our city officials and our elected officials accountable, right? To making sure that in those collective bargaining agreements, there's some way in which these unions can be held accountable. So I would say that, and to me, that's totally connected to this idea of sort of a double standard of justice, right? Why is it that, police who engage in misconduct are judged according to a different set of standards than other folks, right? Why is it that, some communities you have police?
Okay, I came back on.
Why is it that in some communities you have law enforcement engaging in these missions around crime, right? And you don't have that happening in other communities, right? So there's a sort of double standard of justice that I think we can address.
Mr. DuBose?
Sure, thank you. I just want to Thank you all for having this conversation. I think this is probably the way to get it resolved, or at least move toward a solution, is to continue talking about it. We don't want to talk about race because it's uncomfortable. We don't know what questions to ask because we want to be politically correct. We want to not say the wrong thing. But the only way to get to the root of any problem where communication is an issue is to communicate. We have to continue having these conversations. This can't be our first, second, third, or fourth town hall. We need to be on town hall 1,000. And we need to have a town hall every week if necessary, but we can't drop the ball on this. Because I hate to simplify it, but when you talk about unions, you talk about police chiefs, you talk about elected officials, we're talking about a common thread, and they are human beings. And until we are addressing the human factor of how we are all treated and treated equally as human beings in this country, we can talk about policies, we can talk about protocols, and we can talk about procedures till we're blue in the face, because it takes humans to enact them and it takes humans to enforce them. And if those human beings aren't treating everyone just like they treat themselves or as regular human beings, then the policies are not going to be effective. So I would encourage us to continue to have these conversations so that when you see me, you see a Black man, but you see a human being. So thank you.
So I go to what I stated earlier in our conversation, as I stated, because I mentioned that when we talked about reform, we can have all the reforms that we want to until we're blue in the face, but until the culture, the mindset, and the heart does not change of the individuals and our agencies, corporate America, whatever it is, we will continue to see these issues. So that's where my number one hat is culture, mindset, and heart. And then we need to start attacking, reform. And then we will see the change. I'm like, Dr. King is, one of my favorite, heroes, in this world. And I'm like him. I want to be judged by the content of my character and not the color of my skin. And I think if we all take that philosophy, don't judge me based on the color of my skin, judge me based on the content of my character, I think we will begin to start seeing the shift that we all deserve and that we all want to see in this great country of the United States of America and abroad. Thank you for having us. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm looking forward to the next one. As like Keith says, we got to have these conversations. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Thank you for allowing me to moderate today. I'm going to turn it over to Judge Hill Harvey, and thank you to all the panelists. I would love to have far more time to listen to your thoughts.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Sarasota County Bar Association and its Council for Diversity and Inclusion, we thank the viewers, panelists, and moderator for participating in this town hall. I'd like you to look forward to our July 30th town hall and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.